Okay, so this is the test review for rational operations. So we're going to start with simplifying. Remember, on simplifying, all you're doing is crossing out anything that is alike on the numerator and the denominator. So it has to be in the top and in the bottom in order to be crossed out. So the x plus 6 and the x plus 3's get to be crossed out, leaving you with just x minus 5. Since there's nothing in the denominator, you can either put that over 1 or you can just leave it as x minus 5. Okay, 2, 3, and 4 require you to multiply or divide. Remember that you're going to factor. You're not really multiplying. You're not really dividing. You're going to factor each of the problems, and then you're going to simplify them by canceling like we did at the top. So I like to put it over one big fraction. So if I do x squared minus 3x minus 4, that's going to be x minus 4 and x plus 1. If I do x squared plus 4x plus 3, that's x plus 3 and x plus 1. If I do x squared plus x minus 6, that's x plus 3 and minus 2. So now when we go to try to cancel things out, the x plus 1's cancel, the x plus 3's cancel, and the x minus 4's cancel, leaving you with just x minus 2 as your answer. Alright, that's a multiplication problem, so we got to just factor and simplify. Now on the division problem, we have to remember multiply and flip our fraction. Okay, so let's factor the first one, which is going to be x squared minus 1. That's going to become x plus 1 and x minus 1. The denominator of the first fraction stays as the denominator. You're only flipping the second fraction. Okay, so that means the denominator of the second fraction goes in the numerator. So that's going to be x plus 2 and x minus 1. And then if I factor 3x minus 3, I'm going to factor out the GCF of 3. And I'll be left with x minus 1 as my, inside my parentheses. So now we need to cancel. So x minus 1's cancel, x plus 1's cancel. And so you're actually left with x plus 2 times x minus 1 divided by 3. That would be the final answer. Number 4. Again, we're dividing. So we're going to have to make this a multiplication problem and flip our second fraction. So we're going to make this one big fraction. We're going to have x plus 5, and that's squared, so I'm going to go ahead and write that as x plus 5 times x plus 5. And then x squared minus 25 is a difference of two squares, so that's going to be x plus 5 and x minus 5. And now we're at the second fraction, so the denominator is going to go in the top. So two factors of negative 15 that add up to negative 2 are x minus 5 and x plus 3. And then on the bottom is going to be two factors of 35 that add up to 12, which will be x plus 5 and x plus 7. Okay, so now we're at the point where we can start canceling some things out. So plus 5 and plus 5 will cancel. Minus 5 and minus 5 will cancel. Plus 5 and plus 5 will cancel. So we are actually left with x plus 3 divided by x plus 7. Okay? Alright, numbers 5, 6, and 7, all you're doing is finding the least common denominator for the two. So anytime that you have a coefficient, like 2 and 10 are coefficients, you have to find the LCD of the two numbers. So the first thing that I'm going to do is figure out what number does 2 go into and does 10 go into. Keep in mind this is different from a greatest common factor. A greatest common factor can be the lowest number that goes into both of them, but an LCD, or a least common denominator, has to be the number cannot be any lower than the highest number. So our highest number in this is 10, and so we cannot have an LCD between those 2 and 10 that's any lower than 10. So 10 is the first number that 10 goes into and 2 goes into. So our LCD is going to be a 10 for sure. And then we have an x from the first denominator, and our second denominator has an x, but we don't have to put another one because we already took that from the first one. So our LCD is 10x. Number 6, we have to take one of each of these two denominators. So I have to take the x plus 2, and then when I get to my second denominator here, so these are the two we're looking at, when I get to my second denominator, I don't have an x plus 3, so I have to take an x plus 3 as well. So number 6, the LCD is x plus 2 times x plus 3. In number 7, we have to factor first. So I'm going to factor out a 4 for my LCD, leaving me with x minus 5. So my LCD is going to have the first denominator has a 4 and an x minus 5. So my LCD has to have both of those. But then when I go to my second denominator, it's an x minus 5. I already have it as part of my LCD, so I don't have to write it again. So my LCD is 4 times x minus 5. Okay, so the whole reason why we had to do that was so that we could add and subtract these things, and if they don't have a like denominator, we're going to have to find an LCD. So let's look at number 8. It has the same denominator, so all we do is subtract the numerator. So 2 minus 5 is negative 3 divided by 3x. Now this could continue to simplify to negative 1 over x because the 3's can simplify down to negative 1 over x. Number 9, we've got to find an LCD because these are different denominators. So between 7 and 2, we're thinking of a number that 7 goes into and 2 goes into. So 2 doesn't go into 7, so 7 can't be my LCD. But if I take the next factor of 2, or the next multiple of 7, which is 14, 2 does go into 14. So 14 has to be my LCD between these two. If you look at my first denominator, it has an x and a y. So I have to have that as part of my LCD. Then when I get to my second denominator, it has an x. When I look at my LCD, I already have an x, so I don't need to take that x. So my LCD becomes 14xy. So I am trying to make this first fraction have a denominator of 14xy. And I'm trying to make the second denominator have a fraction, or have a denominator of 14xy. So when I look at 7xy, and I have to get it to be 14xy, I would have to multiply it by 2 so that I could get 14. Which means what I do to the bottom, I also have to do to the top. So this is going to become 20. When I look at 2x, I would have to multiply that by a 7 to get 14, and then I need a y also to get xy. So what I do to the bottom, I'm going to have to do to the top. So this would be 105y. So now, I'm going to combine my numerators because my denominators are now the same. They're both 14xy. Now I can't combine the 20 and the 105 because they're not like terms. The 20 does not have a y. So this final answer is just going to be 20 minus 105y divided by 14xy. Alright, number 10. My LCD has to be one of each of those denominators, so I definitely need an x plus 2, but I will also need an x minus 3. So my LCD is both of those, which means I'm going to try to make the first denominator become my LCD, and I'm going to try to make the second denominator become my LCD. So if I start out with the first denominator and I have an x plus 2, I would have to multiply it by an x minus 3 in order to get my denominator. So I'm going to have to multiply the top by x minus 3. So that will be 7x minus 21. Don't forget you have to distribute that. My second denominator is an x minus 3, and I need it to be, or to look like the LCD, so it needs an x plus 2 also. So I'm going to multiply my top one by an x plus 2. So when I distribute, that's going to give me 8x plus 16. Now that I have the denominators the same, x plus 2 times x minus 3, now I can just subtract my numerators. But remember, when you're subtracting, you have to distribute that minus sign. So I'm going to do 7x minus 8x, which is negative 1x. And I'm going to do negative 21 minus 16, which is negative 37. And that would be my final answer. All right, number 11. We have to factor this 4x minus 8, take out a GCF of 4, leaving us with x minus 2. So now my LCD, I need a 4 and an x minus 2, because that's all in my first denominator. When I go to my second denominator, I already have the x minus 2, so I don't need to take that. So my LCD is going to be 4 times x minus 2. So I need to try to make both denominators become 4 times x minus 2. So on the first denominator, it's already a 4 times x minus 2. So I don't have to multiply it by anything to become the LCD. So I am going to leave this entire fraction alone, not going to touch it. So 3x minus 7 will stay up on the numerator. My second denominator has an x minus 2, but it needs that 4 in front. So I'm going to have to multiply it by 4, which means I'm going to multiply the top by 4, giving me 20. Now that the denominators are the same, I can add the numerators. So I'm doing 3x, and then negative 7 plus 20 is a positive 13. Number 12, we need to factor x squared minus 100. This is a difference of two squares, so that gives me x plus 10 and x minus 10. So now when I'm looking for my LCD, that first fraction has a plus 10 and a minus 10, so I'm going to need both of those in my LCD. And then when I go to the second denominator, it has an x minus 10, which I already have, so I don't need to add that. So my LCD is x plus 10, x minus 10. I need to make both denominators become x plus 10 and x minus 10. So the first denominator is already my LCD, so I do nothing to that one. I'm going to keep it as 12, don't have to multiply it. The second denominator only has an x minus 10. I need it to have an x plus 10 also. So I'm going to multiply both the top and the bottom by x plus 10. So this is going to become 3x plus 30 in the numerator. Denominator will be the LCD. Now that I have the same denominator, I can just add those two terms together. So we're going to have 3x, and 12 plus 30 is 42. Okay, number 13, we got to factor this. Two factors of 30 that add up to 11 are 6 and 5. So my LCD has to have x plus 6 and x plus 5 for sure. When I go to my second denominator, it already has an x plus 6, so I don't need to do anything there. So I need to make both of these denominators become the LCD. The first denominator is already the LCD, so I'm going to leave that numerator alone. The second denominator is not the LCD. It's missing an x plus 5. So I have to multiply that numerator by x plus 5 and the denominator by x plus 5 so I can get my LCD. So this is going to become 5x plus 25. Okay, it's a subtraction problem, so we cannot forget to distribute that subtraction sign. Which is going to end up having 4x minus 5x, which is negative x, and minus 25, all over our LCD of x plus 6 times x plus 5. Okay, page 2. All right, number 14, we are cross-multiplying. So now we're not adding and subtracting anymore, we're going to cross-multiply. So remember, we're going to multiply the denominator of one problem times the numerator, of one fraction, times the numerator of the other fraction. And then the opposite of that, the numerator of the first fraction times the denominator of the second. So when I multiply this is going to be 4 times x minus 3. You do have to distribute that. Equals 5 times x plus 3. Have to distribute that as well. So this becomes 4x minus 12. And this becomes 5x plus 15. We need to get our x's on the same side so that we can solve for x. So I'm going to move the 4 to the right side so that I have a positive x. And then I will have to subtract 15 from both sides. So x is going to be equal to negative 27. Now, you should check for extraneous solutions. So that means that in your calculator, I'll do this off to the side, you're going to have to put negative 27 where all of the x's are, and you have to see if the right side actually equals the left side. So you could use your calculator for that. In this particular case, it actually does equal each other. It's 1/6, negative 1/6, and negative 1/6. So this actually works out, and it's not extraneous. Number 15, let's cross multiply. So we have 4 times 3x plus 1 equals 2 times 3x minus 7. That's 12x plus 4 equals 6x minus 14. I'm going to move the 6x to the left side, so this is going to give me 6x plus 4 equals negative 14. And then I'm going to move the 4. So I have 6x equals negative 18, and x is equal to negative 3. You do want to check for extraneous solutions. So on your calculator, you'll want to do 3 times negative 3 plus 1 divided by 2, and you're going to check to see if 3 times negative 3 minus 7 divided by 4, if those are equal. So negative 4 on the left side and negative 4 on the right side. So this works. All right, number 16, when I cross multiply, I actually get a quadratic equation because x times 4x equals 4 times 16. So this is 4x squared, guys. X times x is x squared equals 64. Since I don't have any x terms in my problem, it's just x squareds and numbers, I can actually solve this by using square roots. But you cannot take the square root until you have x squared by itself. So divide by 4 first, leaving us with x squared equals 16. And then we can take the square root of both sides. I do want to remind you that when you take the square root of both sides, you have to put a plus or minus. So the answer is not only 4, but it's also negative 4. Do not forget that. So then you'll have to check both answers. So 4 over 4 is 1, and 16 over 16 is 1. So 4 works. And then negative 4 divided by 4 is negative 1, and 16 over negative 16 is negative 1. So both of them work. All right. Last types of problems we have is when we can't cross multiply and we need to solve it using our least common denominator. So the first thing we're going to do is find the LCD between 5, 5, and 5. I think it's 5. So we're going to multiply all three Okay, we're going to multiply all three fractions by 5. That's our LCD. So remember, these are all numerators. And anything that's in a numerator, if you've got the same thing in the denominator, they get to cancel each other. So this 5 is canceling with the denominator 5, and it's leaving you with just 3. That's what's left over, the part that's right, that didn't get canceled. Plus, this 5 is canceling with this 5, and the part that's left over is that part that's in the numerator. So this becomes 2x plus 8 equals this 5 cancels with this 5, leaving you with what's in the numerator, which is just 13x. So the whole reason why we multiplied by the LCD was because it ends up getting our fractions taken care of in one step. We have no more fractions. We went from 3 fractions, which was ugly, to no fractions, and it's an equation that we can actually solve. So combine like terms. I'm going to move the 2 to the other side. And I'll get that x is equal to 1. You should definitely check to make sure that it's a good answer. So you're going to do 3 over 5 plus, if I put a 1 in for x, that's going to be 2 times 1, which is 2, plus 8 is 10 over 5, equals 13 times 1 is 13 over 5. Pretty sure that 3/5 plus 10/5 is 13/5. So we got a winner. All right, number 18, we've got to find an LCD first. So between the denominators x, 5, and x, our LCD, remember, look at the first denominator. You need whatever's in the first denominator. Then look at the second one, which is 5. If you look at our LCD, we don't have a 5 in our LCD right now, so I have to put a 5 in our LCD. I'm going to multiply it by whatever we have there already. Then when I go to the third fraction, or the third denominator, it's an x. I already have an x in my LCD, so I don't need to take another one. So my LCD becomes 5x. So I'm going to multiply all three of these by that number. Or that expression, sorry. Okay, so now I've got to cancel. So if I have an x on the top and an x on the bottom, they can cancel out, and I am left with 5 times 3. 5 from here, the 3 from here. Plus, if I have a 5 on the top and a 5 on the bottom, they cancel, and I'm left with 8 and x. So 8 times x equals, if I have an x on the top and an x on the bottom, I'm left with negative 13 times 5. So this becomes 15 plus 8x equals negative 65. So if I subtract 15, I get that 8x is equal to negative 80, and x is equal to negative 10. Okay? So now we should check to make sure that there are no extraneous solutions. So we have 3 over negative 10 plus 8 over 5 equals negative 13 over negative 10. So if you put that into your calculator, you're going to actually end up getting that these are correct. It's a positive 13 over 10. So this will become a 16 over 10, and when you subtract 3 over 10, you get 13 over 10. And even though those are both negative, it doesn't matter. That's actually a positive. So this works. Okay, LCD here, we only have two denominators. We have an x minus 2 and an x minus 2. So, I think the LCD is going to be x minus 2. So we're going to multiply the LCD by x minus 2. We have to multiply this term by x minus 2, even though it's not a fraction. We still have to multiply it. All the terms have to be multiplied by the LCD. And we'll multiply the last one by the LCD. So now we get to cancel. X minus 2 on top, x minus 2 on bottom. We are left with just 10 plus, nothing cancels here, so this is going to be 7 times x minus 2 equals x minus 2 on bottom, x minus 2 on top, leaving me with 5x. So if I distribute, I'm going to have 7x minus 14 equals 5x. If I combine my like terms, 10 minus 14 is negative 4. And then I'm going to go ahead and move the 7 over. It'll just be easier to get the x's on the same side. And so x is going to be 2. Okay, so we should go back and check. Do this in your calculator. So 10 over 2 minus 2 plus 7 equals 10 over 2 minus 2. So this becomes 10 over 0 plus 7 equals 10 over 0. Well, here's the funny thing about undefined. So when you have a 0 in the denominator, that's an undefined number. If I add something to undefined, I'm still going to get undefined. So this actually does work. Okay, so now in number 20, let's look for our LCD. First fraction has an x plus 3, so that is definitely going to have to be part of my LCD. The second fraction has an x. Now that x is completely different from the x that's with the x plus 3. They're two separate terms. You cannot separate the x from the 3. That's an all or nothing deal there. So we don't have one of those x's. We need another x out to the side. And then x plus 3 we already have. So our LCD is x times x plus 3. So all of them need to get multiplied by that. And now we can cancel. So x plus 3's are going to cancel, leaving me with a 2 and an x. Don't forget that x right there and that 2 right there. Plus, the x is going to cancel, so I'm going to be left with a 4 and an x plus 3 equals, the x plus 3's are going to cancel. I'm still left with an x and an x plus 2. So I'm going to distribute. And now when I look at the problem, it turns out that it has an x squared in it. So unlike the one we had before that had an x squared where we could take the square root, we can't do that because there's actually another, there's an x term in the problem as well. You can't take the square root of x. So this is one where we have to get everything to one side of the equation and have it be equal to 0. So I am going to move all of these. I guess, actually, let me combine like terms. That probably is what most of y'all will do. This is going to become 6x plus 12 equals x squared plus 2x. Okay, but we can't solve for x, so we're going to have to move this to one side. So I'm going to move these all to the same side. That's going to give me 0 on the left. And it's going to give me x squared minus 4x minus 12 on the right. Now I can factor and get my solutions. So 2 factors of negative 12 that add up to negative 4 are negative 6 and positive 2. So my two solutions are going to be 6 and negative 2. Okay, so you do want to check both of those. So you'll want to do 2 divided by 6 plus 3 plus 4 over 6 equals 6 plus 2 is 8. I'm going to kind of do some of this in my head, and 6 plus 3 is 9. So you have 2 over 9 plus 4 over 6, and you want to know if that's 8 over 9. Your calculator will check that, and it ends up becoming, yes, 8 over 9 equals 8 over 9. So 6 works. And then when I do the same thing for negative 2, so when I put in a negative 2, every place I'm going to have 2 minus 2, which is 0. And so negative 2 works as well. All right, for some of you guys, you have an extra problem on your paper that other people don't. So those of you who don't have this problem on your paper, go ahead and listen anyway. It may be very beneficial for you to know how to do this particular problem. So if we are trying to add these two together, and we need to multiply by the LCD. So on all of these, I'm going to have to factor to figure out what my LCD is. So this is going to be x plus 4 and x minus 3. This one is going to be x minus 5 and x plus 4. And this one is going to be x minus 3 and x minus 5. Okay? So when I go to find my LCD, remember, you're going to start with the first denominator, and both of those are going to have to be part of the LCD. So right now, x plus 4 and x minus 3 both have to be part of the LCD. Then I'll go to my second denominator, and I'll look at x minus 5. I don't have an x minus 5, so that has to be part of my LCD. I already have an x plus 4, so I don't need that one. Then when I go to my last denominator, I already have an x minus 3, and I already have an x minus 5. So my LCD becomes x plus 4 times x minus 3 times x minus 5. Okay? So here's what you have to do. You have to multiply all of these by x plus 4 times x minus 3 times x minus 5. All three of them. Okay, so the LCD has to be multiplied by all three. So now we get to cancel. Well, if you notice, this is going to cancel with this, and this is going to cancel with this, and it's going to leave me with 6 times x minus 5. Plus, when I look at the second one, this is going to cancel with this is going to cancel with this, and it's going to leave me with 8 times x minus 3. And then for my last one, my x minus 3s are going to cancel, and my x minus 5 is going to cancel, and it's going to leave me with 4 times x plus 4. So not as hard as it looked like it was going to be. So now we can distribute. We want to combine like terms. And then we're going to want to move our x's. So we are going to get 10x minus 54 equals 16. We'll add 54. So 10x is equal to 70. And x is equal to 7. And we're done.